Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Menachos. We're at the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. We'll be learning Ayin Vav Amud Beis and Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph and ending at the end of that page. We're going to have some ground to catch up during Chol HaMoed. I don't have work during Chol HaMoed, so that's really when I'm going to hopefully be able to catch up. We will most likely be behind over the course of Yontif. I don't know if you saw Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, which is the second half of what should be today's lot, but it's not small. And Ayin Ches Amud Beis is also not small. And Ayin Tes Amud Beis is also not small. So we have some work cut out for us. And Amir Hashem, over the course of the Chag, we will catch up. So right now we're about 8 lines from the bottom of the page on Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. And we're starting with the 2 dots where it says Chutz milach metoda uniziros shehein baos eser eser. So our Mishnah at the top of this page on Ayin Vav Amud Aleph had indicated that when it comes to lach metoda and when it comes to Nazirus, that those korbanos were brought with 10 breads. So says the Gemara, lach metoda behedya ksibuhu. There, the Torah is express and explicit about the fact that there are 10 lechamim. That part's clear. Nazirus. How do we know that Nazirus is also 10? That's not said explicitly in the Torah. So the Amar Mar, because the pasuk says shilamav, not shilamo. It's shlamim, but shilamav. What's the context? So take a look at the pasuk. The pasuk says in Vayikra Zayin, pasuk Yud Gimel, al chalos lechem chametz yakrif korbano. This is talking about the lach metoda. The Gemara says al zevach todas shilamav. Now shilamav is plural, and because it's plural, it's not just lach metoda that has 10 lechamim. It's also going to be something else. What is the ribui? L'rabos shalmei nazir. So therefore, we see that both lach metoda, where the Torah is explicit about the fact that it's 10, and nazirus, which is included from the plural word of shlamav by lach metoda, we therefore see that both of those have a din of 10 lechamim. Amar Rav Tuvi Bar Kisna. Rav Tuvi Bar Kisna says, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel teaches us halacha. Lach metoda, where normally 40 of them are brought, she'afan only arba chalos, the halacha is that yotza. Now this is very, very difficult because, I think it's a davar yadua that the lach metoda came in 40 loaves of 10 different types of chalas times 4. 4 different types of chalas times 10. So says the Gemara, v'haba'in and arba'im. How can you say that we are yotze even with 4? Hare, the din is that we need to have 40. So says the Gemara mitzvah. When we say 40, that's only a din lechatchila. But b'di'eved, you're yotze even with 4. Says the Gemara, how can you say that's true? After all, v'alboy afrushe truma minayu. We know that we have to be mafresh truma. And the Gemara says, v'chitema de mafresh mikol chada v'chada. If you think the case is that we are mafresh from each and every individual loaf, that can't be, because there's only one hafrasha when it comes to the lach metoda. Echad amar rachmana, shelo yitol pros. You're not allowed to take a piece of one. You need to dedicate a 10%, whatever you're giving over, but it's done in one fell swoop. And in fact, this is the pasuk that we see on the side of Vayikra Zayin Yud Daled. V'ikriv mimenu echad mikol korban truma le'Hashem v'chule. Echad. When you're doing this korban, the meiser has to be done in one unit. Shelo yitol peros. So says the Gemara, great point, but not a problem. Because even had it been that the number of chalos that were being brought for the lach metoda was 4, even the din b'di'evet, how could you have a singular removal of all the chalos? It's simple. The hafrasha wasn't done after the chalas were made. The hafrasha was done when it was still in the dough mode, in the dough phase. The afreshinu belisha, and because they were mafresh in the lisha, they were able to be mafresh, still checking off that box of echad. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Mesvei. Kol ha-menachos she-riba b'midas chalasan, o she-miet b'midas chalasan, ksheros. In general, when it comes to korbanos, if someone increased the number of chalas, or if someone decreased the number of chalas, the halacha is kosher, with one set of exceptions. Chutz milechem hapanim v'chabite kohen gadol, and the next two words are very problematic for us, v'lachmei toda, and then lastly, v'nazirus. Now, what did Shmuel teach us? Shmuel taught us that if you have only four lachmei toda, you're yotze. But the problem is that this brisa that's found two lines from the bottom of the page, a brisa that we have here in the Tosefta, the brisa there says it's only kosher to minimize or to decrease the number of chalos in certain cases. But lachmei toda is not one of them. So how can Shmuel say that lachmei toda are kosher less than 40 and even down to 4? Hare, the Mishnah says chutz, and one of the examples is lachmei toda. So of course you need 40. So says the Gemara, don't worry. Shmuel has another Marimakom that contrasts with this brisa. Hu de Amar, turning to the top of Ayin Vav, Amud Beis, Shmuel holds ki haitana. There's another Tana that disagrees with the Tosefta that we just learned. The Tosefta that we just learned said you're not allowed to decrease the number of lachmei toda, among other menachos, but you're not allowed to decrease the number of lachmei toda from 40. It has to be 40. What does Shmuel use as his Tana? The Tanya, top line. Kol ha-menachos sheriba b'midas chalasan, o shemiat b'midas chalasan ksheros. He says, a similar start to the brisa, that one who increases the number of chalas and one who decreases the number of chalas is still kosher. What are the exceptions over here? Chutz mi lechem apanim v'chabite kohen gadol. What's missing from here? Lachmei toda. So this author of the brisa that we have on the top of this page, and this is the actual source of this brisa, it's not found on other places, it's found right here. So says the Gemara, that teaches us that Shmuel is able to follow this Tana. This Tana says that even lachmei toda can be reduced. So, what that means is that we have a machlokes tanoim between the Tosefta on the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph and the brisa on the top of Ayin Vav Amud Beis as to whether or not it would be mutter to reduce the number of breads for lachmei toda. Really, it should be 40. According to Shmuel, what do? It can even be 4. What about the Tosefta on the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph? Don't worry, we have a brisa on the top of Ayin Vav Amud Beis that aligns with my shita, says Shmuel, and therefore we're good to go. Now, v'yesh omrim, in that brisa, we also see the shita of the Tosefta reflected as the dissenting opinion. V'yesh omrim, af lachmei toda unazirus. Even lachmei toda are limited. So that means the Tanakama versus the V'yesh Omrim. So therefore, Shmuel has 2 legs to stand on. Good to go. So we tried to show that lachmei toda can go from 40 to 4, and we supported that shita. Okay, next. We're 5 lines down on Ayin Vav Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna, minchas ma'afeh. When we talk about a korban mincha that was baked, as we spoke about yesterday, there are 2 types of minchas ma'afeh tanur. There are chalos and there are rikikin. So says the Gemara, if minchas ma'afeh she'afah chala achas yotza. He says, even if there's only 1, normally there's more, normally there's 10. But he says you're yotze even if there's 1. My taima, why does Rav Huna hold that you're yotze even with only 1 ma'afeh tanur, or even only with only 1 korban mincha? So says the Gemara, because even though the pasuk reads matzos, the kri is matzos, it's written chaser. It's written in a deficient way. So it says the Gemara, matzas ksiv. What does the word matzas mean? Singular, not matzos. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second. If we're going to read the pasuk that way, it generates a problem for Rav Huna. Maskif la Rav Papa, taima dechsiv matzas, haksiv matzos lo. The reason why Rav Huna was able to say that only 1 matzah is sufficient is because of the kri ksiv, and the way that it's written, the ksiv is matzas, but had it been matzos, it would be more. V'halagabe lachmei toda, but when it comes to lachmei toda, d'chsiv matzos, v'amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna v'amar Shmuel, lachmei toda shafan arba chalos yotam. We have a big problem. You want to tell me over here by Ma'afeh Tanur that we're able to only have 1 and be Yotze, the din of Rav Huna, and it's because of the word matzas versus matzos, the kri ksiv. But if that kri ksiv is important, we have the same kri ksiv by lachmei toda. And if in fact we have the kri ksiv by lachmei toda, that would at least imply that perhaps we do need 40, but that's against Shmuel. Says the Gemara, Hahi pliga. It seems to be that the two of them don't necessarily agree with one another. That could be that Shmuel and Rav Huna don't necessarily agree. That brings us to a new Mishnah. From now until the end of the day today, we're going to be doing a little bit more math, not all math, but a little bit more math. And let's jump right in. We're about a quarter of the way down on Ayin Vav Amud Beis at a new Mishnah. Ha'omer, the Hakrabas Ha'omer, coming upon us shortly. What's today's day? Today's the 11th day of Nisan. So in 5 days, we would bring the Hakravas HaOmer. Emir Hashem, we will bring the Korban Omer with Sheibana Beis HaMikdash. HaOmer, Hayaba Isaron Mishlish Sayin. We would take 3 sa'ah of grain, of barley, in order to generate 1 isaron for the Omer. So for the Omer, there's a 3-to-1 ratio of starting grain and finishing grain. We'd start with 3 sa'ah, and we'd end with 1 isaron. But not all foods were like that. For the shtei halechem, it was different. Shtei esronin, mishalosh sayin. We were able to generate 2 isaron from the same 3 sa'ah. Why would the production be different? We're going to discuss this in the Gemara. So that's what we have. The Omer's ratio is from 3 sa'ah we can generate 1 isaron of barley flour that is appropriate for the Korban Omer. And for Shtei Alechem, from 3 sa'ah we can generate 2 esronim. What about the Lechem Apanim? Says the Gemara, 1-to-1 ratio. Esrim va'arba esronim me esrim va'arba sayin. So obviously the Gemara is going to be bothered by the shifting ratios. When it comes to Hakravas HaOmer, it seems to be the least efficient. We have 3 sa'ah, and it takes 3 sa'ah to generate only 1 isaron. When it comes to Shtei Alechem, we have 3 sa'ah, and they generate twice as much, 2 esronim. And when it comes to the last example of the Lechem Apanim, by the Shtei Alechem, Shtei Alechem is 3-to-2 ratio. Lechem Apanim is a 1-to-1 ratio. For every sa'ah, they could generate an isaron. That's very odd. So says the Gemara a third of the way down as the Gemara opens at the large Gimel Mem, my taima, the 5th line, the 6th line actually of Rashi toward the top of the page, my taima, bami Gimel Sayin. Why is it that we're measuring the way that we are? So says the Gemara, Kevan deme chadash asi, umiseoren asi, isaron muvchar lo asi el mishalosh sayin. That when it comes to the Hakravas HaOmer, the reason why our 3 sa'ah only generate 1 isaron, while by the Shtei Alechem, and certainly by the Lechem Apanim, 1 sa'ah could generate so much more, is because there's a double negative to the Hakravas HaOmer in regards to the efficiency of generating an isaron. The first inefficiency is that it's chadash. When there's new wheat, there's more chaff. And second of all, umiseoren asi, that is also an inefficiency. These are 2 reasons why there's more chaff, and therefore there's more refuse within the mixture of 3 sa'ah, and therefore, when it comes to the Hakravas HaOmer, 3 sa'ah of barley, of fresh cut barley, will only generate 1 isaron, 3-to-1 ratio. The next Gemara says, Shtei Alechem, Shtei Esronos, Mishalosh Sayin. There we said that we have 2 esronim of flour for the Shtei Alechem that's yielded from the Shalosh Sayin. How does that work? Because we're not dealing with the same ingredient. By the Omer, what were we dealing with? Barley. Barley, I don't work on a farm. Barley apparently has more chaff. Kevan de Mechitin Asyan, because the Shtei Alechem was made from wheat flour and not from barley flour, Afal Gav de Mechadash Asyan, even though the Shtei Alechem had to be cut post-Pesach, because it had to be after the Hakravas HaOmer, as we saw earlier in the Masechta, therefore, Shtei Esronos Asu Mishalosh Sayin. So now we're beginning to get a little bit of flavor, a little bit of color, to understand the distinctions in the ratios. By the Korban HaOmer, there was a double inefficiency. It was new and it was barley. Those are 2 reasons why there's extra chaff. And therefore, even though we started with 3, we're only going to yield 1. When it comes to the shtei alechem, which is chitin, well, chitin has lower chaff, but it's still chadash because it was post Pesach, post Hakravas Omer. So the ratio is definitely better. It's 100% better than the previous version of the Omer. So because it's chitin, so we need 3 sa to generate shtei esronim. Now let's move on to the last category. The lechem apanim, just about halfway down. The lechem apanim is esrim v'arba esronos me esrim v'arba sa in my time. Why is it that it's so remarkably efficient? It's 3 times more efficient than the Omer. By the Omer, we needed 3 sa to generate 1 isaron. Now we need 1 sa to generate 1 isaron. So says the Gemara, my timer, why is it that when it comes to the lechem apanim, that we were able to be so efficient and generate a full isaron from every sa? So says the Gemara, kevan demechitan asu. First of all, it's not barley, it's wheat. And second of all, umiyashan asu, it's older, it's dried out. Therefore, Isarun muvchar asim isa. We're able to generate a perfect isaron from every sa. So it's double efficiency, a double inefficiency by the Omer, new and barley, and therefore 3-to-1 ratio. When it comes to shtei alechem, it's a single inefficiency, which is, it's chitin, which is a plus, but it's new, which is a minus. So 3-to-2 ratio. And when it comes to the lechem apanim, there it's a 1-to-1 ratio because it's chitin and it's not new, so it's doubly efficient. And that is how the Gemara explains what looked like an odd Mishnah where the ratios of yield changed by the scenario. By the Omer, it was 3-to-1. By the shtei alechem, it was 3-to-2. And by the lechem apanim, it was 1-to-1. A few lines before the next Mishnah, the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa, Kol Menachos, Sheriba b'midos esronan, O shemi'et b'midas isaron, or esronan, psulos. If you had a scenario where the korban minchas yield, the final yield, the product that you were going to use for the mincha was too big or too small, it would be pasul. Meaning, we know what we're after. We need an isaron for the Omer. We need an isaron for the shtei alechem, and we need an isaron for each of the breads for the lechem apanim. We know what the outcome is. What is rolled out of the machine, it has to be an isaron. That would be pasul if you had the wrong volume when you were done. However, riba b'midas sayin shalahen o shemi b'midas sayin shalahen ksheros. If you were particularly inefficient and you said, you know what, I don't want to do 3 sa of barley for the Omer. I want to do 5. I want to do 7. That's all fine and good. The process matters less as long as the yield is an isaron. You don't want to do 3 sa. You feel like it'll be a little bit easier to do 4 or 5 or 6. Great. We don't care. That's kosher. What you're not allowed to do is mess with the outcome. The outcome is an isaron for the Omer, an isaron for each of the shtei alechem, and an isaron for each of the lechem apanim. That brings us to another Mishnah toward the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Beis, heading to the end of the Perek Baruch Hashem. We are 2/3 of the way down. Let's continue. HaOmer, the flour, the barley flour of the Omer, Haya Menupa B'Shalosh Esrei Napa. It was filtered with 13 different filters. Take a look at Rashi, which is about 1/4 of the way down in the very small print of Rashi from the top of the page. Rashi says, "Ha'omer hayim menupa b'yud gimel napa halacha l'Moshe miSinai." This wasn't some rational approach to cleaning things up for the Omer. It's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It needs to go through 13. Why? That's not a question we can ask about halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Kodesh Baruch Hu told Moshe it needs to be 13 sieves. So you know what Moshe said? Yes, sir. Thank you, Eibishter. Whatever you tell me, I will do. The Mishnah continues. That was true by the Omer. By the shtei alechem, it was b'shtei mesrei. When it came to the flour of the shtei alechem, which we said above in the previous Mishnah, which was wheat. Actually, the Mishnah doesn't say that, but the Gemara articulates that. So b'shtei alechem, the shtei alechem had b'shtei mesrei. They had 12 sieves, 12 colanders or filters. The lechem apanim b'yud aleph. The lechem apanim would have 11 different filtering systems. However, dissenting opinion, Reb Shimon Omer lo hayalen kitzva. There was no fixed number of filters, which means he disagrees on the halacha l'Moshe miSinai status. Elasoles menupa kol tzorcha hayamevi, and whatever was needed to yield a clean isaron is what he would do. That's exactly how it would work out. Shenemar v'lakachta soles ve'afisa osa. You would take a soles and you would bake it. Take it. What does that mean? Whatever it meant. If you bought it like we can go to the store now and buy perfectly clean flour. Our flour is gorgeous compared to what they had. When we go into the store, I remember when I lived in Eretz Yisrael, the minhag then I presume it's still true, we had a little flour filter. You'd pour in a little filter, let's say you needed a cup, you'd scoop a cup out of the bag, you'd put it into the filter, and you'd shake it over a plate. Came out below, we almost never found anything. I actually asked my Rebbe this shaila. Remember, I don't understand why we're even checking. It's miyat she'eno matzui. You'll do this filtering 100 times, you'll never see a bug. It's like such a low standard. It's like shatnez in certain brand suits. This brand of suit, they've never found shatnez. Why do I have to check it? Because that's what you didn't do. You didn't do that. It's like a Jewish thing to do, so you do it. But really, really halachically, when there's a massive minority, which is miyat she'eno matzui, then the halacha is you really don't have to check. But I'm not a posek, nor am I saying that that's what we should do. I'm just saying that that's that is the actual measure. So fine. So the Gemara says over here that was the din, that we had to have everything be menupa. There were 13, again, Tanakama, 13 filters for Omer, 12 filters for Shtei Lechem, 11 for Lechem Apanim. Reb Shimon says there were no such fixed numbers, we just had to make sure it was clean. The Gemara opens 15 lines or so from the bottom of the page, Tanu Rabbanan. Bidaka begasa, bidaka begasa. It would go through a thin filter, and then a thinner filter, and then a larger hole filter, and then again and again. This Gemara is a little confusing. What does that mean? You're doing the same exact filtering twice? So Reb Shimon argues with this Tanakam. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, no. Shlosh esrei napos hayu b'mikdash, zu l'mal mizu, v'zu l'mal mizu. The most coarse to the least coarse. That makes more sense. Elyona koletes subin. The largest holes would collect the bran, which was, I guess, a certain part of the grain. And tachtona koletes soles. And the bottom one would filter out what we needed, actually. By the end product, it would keep the soles and lose another feature of the flour called kemach. Today, in modern Hebrew, we call kemach flour. The kemach that we're talking about here is some type of powdery material that actually wasn't the flour, some type of contaminant of sorts. It was mixed in, but it wasn't the soles, which is what we wanted. That brings us to the two dots, the second of the last shortest lines here. Reb Shimon Omer lo haya lehen kitzva. He said there was no fixed number of filters. Tanu Rabbanon. The rabbis taught us in a brisa based on a pasuk. The pasuk is Vayikra Chav Daled. Let's read the whole pasuk inside. V'lakachta soles ve'afisa osa. You take soles and you bake it. Shtei mesrei chalos, and it's 12 chalos. Shnei esronim. It was 2 esronim. Yihyeh hachalo ha'echas. Good. So back inside. Soles ve'afisa osa. Melamed shenikches soles. You don't have to do the filtering. You could buy it that way. As long as it's menupa, the concluded version of menupa, as long as it's clean, you're good to go. Uminayin she'afilu chitin. How do we know that this was true not only by the Omer, but even by other types of korbanos? Let's say the Shtei Alechem, says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar v'lakachta. That's the first word in that pasuk, v'lakachta, mikol makom. Yochol af b'shar menachos kain. Maybe we should say that this is true even with other korbanos mincha. Talmud Lomar osa. No. There is a limiting factor. Only by the lechem apanim did we allow that for chitin, but not by other ones, mipnei hachisachon. Because we wanted people to be able to save money. My mipnei hachisachon, what does that mean? Says the Gemara, Amar Rebbe Lazar, haTorah chasa al mamonon shel Yisrael. When it came to the lechem hapanim, which was it was a lot of flour. It was chaf dalet esronos, and it was every single week, and it was quite costly. So there we allowed one to be more mekil because mamonan shel Yisrael. Heicha remiza. How do we have precedent? From where do we have precedent? I should say that we're chas on the mamonim shel Yisrael. So that a Kodesh Baruch Hu is chas tichsid, because the pasuk says in Bamidbar Perek Kaf v'ishkisas haida ve'es be'iram. You didn't just feed the people, but shtuptem into the pasuk also is bi'iram, their animals. So you see, it's one effort to service two. That's chas al mamonon shel Yisrael, or chas on the time of Eretz Yisrael. Hadron aloch elu menachos nikmatzos baruch Hashem. We finished the seventh perek of Maseches Menachos. Yiratzon, we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Let us continue into a mathematical Mishnah and a mathematical Gemara that Emir Hashem will bring us to the end of the page before the 9:30 Ma'ariv. The Korban Toda had 40 loaves. There were 4 different kinds of breads that were brought. One matzah, the rest chametz, and there were 10 of each of them. So 4 times 10 is 40. So Hatoda, which had 40, hayasa ba chamesh sa'in Yerushalmios. It was generated from 5 sa that were a Yerushalayim measurement. However, at some point in time, there was a change in what the measuring cup was. It used to be that chamesh sa'in could yield 40 flowers, 40 chalos, excuse me. But then that measure changed. Shehein sheish midbarios. The cup got smaller, and then it took another scoopful in order to generate the same yield. So 5, let's say it's 5 cups, and then they modified the cup to be 7/8 of a cup, or whatever, 5/6 of a cup, whatever it is. So that's what the Gemara says, and shtei ephos, which is another measurement. And now let's talk about each of the 2 categories. We're going to talk first about midbarios, and then Yerushalmios. We said midbarios was sheish, that there were 6 sa'ah. So, last line of the page on Ayin Vav Amud Beis. Ha'efa shalosh sayin. We said that there were 2 ephos, and if 2 ephos is equivalent to 6 midbarios, then 1 epha is equal to shalosh sayin in midbarios, because we said that in the midbarios that was 6 sa would yield the toda. So if that's shtei ephos, then half of that is shalosh sayin, which is the same measure as esrim isaron, as 20 isaron. And if we're going to look at it from the esrim isaron perspective, so the Mishnah then splits it up. Asara lechametz ve'asara lematzah. 10 of them were given to chametz, which was one of the 4 types. Ve'asara, another 10 esronim, were given to the matzah. Let's turn to the top of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, continuing in our Mishnah. Now, asara lechametz means isaron lechala. We said we were giving 10 esronim to the chametz, and there were 10 chalas. Remember, there were 40 chalas total for the toda. One of the 4 types was chametz, and of that, it was proportionate, so that there were 10 chametz. There were 10 chametz chalas. So 10 chametz chalas and 10 esronim means that each chametz chala was 1 isaron. Now, ve'asara lematzah, the other 10 esronim were given to the matzah, to the non-chametz ones. But uvematzah shalosh minim. With matzah, there were 3 different types. So we're taking the 10 esronim and dividing them over the 3 types of matzah, which is chalos, rekikin, uravucha. So therefore, because we had the 3 types, let's just review. The Toda has 4 types of chalos. They have chametz, they have chalos, they have rekikin, and they have ravucha. The chametz got its own 10 isaron, 10 chalos, 10 esronim. Very simple math. But the matzahs have 3 different types and 10 esronim to service those 3 different types. So we have 10 esronim left of the Korban Toda for chalos, rekikin, and ravucha. So the 3rd line of the Mishnah says on the top of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph that nimtzeu shlosha esronim ushlish l'chol min v'min. That each of the 3 matzah types, which is chalos, rekikin, and ravucha, each of them, which had 10, each of them were therefore made by 3 1/3 esronim. Ushalosh chalos le'isaron. So, and we ended up with 10 chalos. So the way that it would work is that there were 3 chalos for every isaron. So that means that the chametz matzahs were 3 times as large as the chametz chalos, the chametz todas were all made from an isaron. But each of the matzahs were made from 1/3 of an isaron. So the matzah that was the chametz from the toda that was made from an isaron. All the other ones were significantly smaller. Now all of that is the world of midbarios. When we measure with 6 sa'ah to the Korban Toda. However, on the 4th line of the Gemara, uvemida Yerushalmis, they measured with different units altogether. we have our system. All the joke always goes that, of course, we're right, we're Americans, but the rest of the world doesn't use our measuring system, right? So the Gemara says, "Uvamida Yerushalmis." If we go back to the initial number, to me the Yerushalmis, so then the Gemara says, "Hayu shloshim kav." There were 15 kav, and that's chamesh esrei lechametz, v'chamesh asar lematzah. Chamisha asar, excuse me, lechametz, v'chamisha asar lematzah. Again, the volume in the end is going to be the same. It was enough to make 40 challahs, but they were talking in different units of measure. I can talk in yards, and I can talk in inches. I can talk in feet. I can talk in meters. The volume of flour was the same, but they were talking a different language. If I walk into Europe and I say a foot, and they say I'm, X number of meters tall, all I need to do is convert. But we're not talking about a different volume of flour, just different measures, units of measure. So by midbarios, they were talking in terms of esronim. Over here, we're talking in terms of kav. So here's what the Gemara says. Uvemida Yerushalmis, we're on the top of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. Uvemida Yerushalmis hayu shloshim kav. There were 30 units, there were 30 kav. And just like in the previous case, we split up the chametz to one side and all of the matzah to the other for the korban toda. Therefore, chamisha asar lechametz, 15 kav of flour were saved for chametz, v'chamisha asar lematzah, and 15 kav were saved for the matzahs. The chamisha asar lechametz yielded kavu mechza lechala, because we had 10 chametz chalas and 15 kav. 15 divided by 10 is 1.5. Therefore, every matzah that was done for chametz was kavu mechza lechala. No problem, we got it. And the chamisha asar lematzah, for the 3 different types of matzah, which, as we said, were chalos, rikikin, and revucha, uvematzah shalosh minin, chalos, rikikin, revucha, nimtzu, chameshes kavin, lechol min umin, ushtei chalos lekav. That when it comes to the matzos, so the matzos have 3 types. That means we have 15 kav, all for matzah. There are 3 different types: chalos, rikikin, and revucha. 15 kav of matzah divided by 3 types of matzah means that there are 5 kav for each type of the matzah, which was 5 each for chalos, rikikin, and revucha. Ushtei chalos lekav. And the math plays out that there were 2 chalas that were made from every kav, because as pointed out, there were 5 kav for 10 chalos. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And that concludes our Mishnah. So just to simplify somewhat, I said it already, just to say it again, we're not talking about a different amount of flour. All we're talking about is different units of measure. And in the Midbarios, they were using units of Isaron. And in the Yerushalmios, they were using measures of kav. So the numbers play a little differently, even though we're talking about the same exact conclusion. I'm the same height if you call me 5'10", 5'11", or if you say whatever the equivalent would be in meters, right? Good. Let's start the Gemara. We're on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, about 10 lines down. Hatoda, hayisabah chamesh sa'in Yerushalmios. Quoting from the beginning of our Mishnah, that the beginning of our Mishnah said that the 40 lechamim of the Toda, the 40 lachmei Toda, were made from 5 sa'a Yerushalmios. Says the Gemara, Minani Mili, how do you know this to be true? Says the Gemara, it's not just asking about the 5 sa'a, that little aleph there. Do you have a little aleph after Yerushalmios? Does anybody have that? It says Hatoda at the open of the Gemara. Hatoda haisa ba chamesh sa'in Yerushalmios. Nothing there? So I have in my Gemara a little aleph, v'chule. What does that mean? We don't only want to answer now about Yerushalmios, we want to answer about Midbarios also. How do we know that Yerushalmios were 5 sa, and that the unit of measure was changed by Midbarios to be 6 sa to yield the same amount, so a smaller cup size? So the Gemara says, Mino Animili, Amar Rav Chizda, de Amar Kra, Ha'efa ve'habas. An efa is a dry measurement. A bas is a liquid measurement of the same cup size. Tochen echad haya. Ma bas shalosh sayin. Just like the bas, the liquid measure, held 3 sa in volume. Af efa shalosh sayin. So what do we see over here? Actually, not Yerushalmios. We're answering Midbarios, because Midbarios from the bottom of the Mishnah 9 Vav Mid Beis was the unit of 6. Okay, that's a Gevaldik Maramakom, except for one problem. Ubas Gufa Minala. The premise that we were saying that a bas and an ephah were 3 was that a bas was 3. We were learning from the word bas that a bas, which is a liquid measure, was 3. Meichatesi. So says the Gemara, Ilema dichsiv laseis maser hachomer habas, that it's a meiser, it's a tenth of the chomer of bas. The problem is that the word chomer is used in other places. Efa nami haksiv asiris hachomer ha'efa. We already have that idea, a tenth of the chomer. You didn't quote that pasuk. Ella, this is fascinating historically, chomer lo yadana kama. The word chomer, we actually don't know what that measure is. A tenth of an unknown number is an unknown number. We don't know what chomer is. Hachanami by bas lo yodana kama. We don't know that bas is 3 from that pasuk. If it would have been that chomer was 30, then yes, a tenth of 30 would be 3, and then we would have bas, but we don't know that number. Ella says the Gemara, mehacha. We instead know that a bas is 3, and therefore an ephah is 3, and therefore midbarios are 6, because it's shtei ephos. Where do we know that from? From a pasuk. Which pasuk is it? Where am I pasukim over here? From Yechezkel. The pasuk reads, I'm just going to read it with the nekudo so I don't butcher it. V'chok hashemen habas, hashemen ma'asar habas, min hakor, aseres habatim chomer, ki aseres habatim chomer. A repetitive pasuk. We're only going to draw from the middle line there. Ma'aser habas min hakor. We know what a kor is. A kor is 30 sa. So therefore, the ma'asar, which is called bas, of 30 is 3. Now we have our Mari Makom. Now we know that bas is 3. And going back to Rav Chizda's draw from the pasuk, which is just like the bas is 3, ma bas shalosh sayin, af efa shalosh sayin. Now we have answered our question from the pasuk in Yechezkel. Now we know that there was a change. What we see is that in the times of Yechezkel already, there was a switch from Yerushalmios, which was 5, to Midbarios, which was 6. Now let's talk about policy, because it's very confusing that we changed the size of the measuring cup. Why did we do that? Okay, that's not for now as to why we did that. Are we allowed to do it again? So Shmuel engages in this question. Amar Shmuel, about halfway down, buckle up. This is a very difficult Gemara for the next 15 lines. And I'm telling you now that certain Mahalchim in this Gemara have 3 wildly different shitas as to how to understand them. So says the Gemara as follows, Amar Shmuel, Ein mosifin al hamidos. You can't change the measuring cup, yoser mishasus, more than a sixth. So if I have a cup that is 6, I can make it 7. That's less than a 1/6 difference, right? It depends how you measure, actually. Let me do this a little differently. If I have 9, I can make it into 10, because that's a smaller percentage. But if I have 2, I cannot make it to 3. And perhaps 5, I could make it to 6 if you're counting me legav me levar, like David pointed out. We're going to get into that a little bit later. So Shmuel says you are not allowed to make that cup larger. You cannot change the measuring cups in a way which is greater than a sixth. And velo al hamatbeya yoser mishasos. And as well, you can't change a coin. Really, they're talking about the weight of a coin. That's not how we roll. We don't measure our quarters to see if one's heavier than the other. They're all pretty uniform because the system that makes them are pretty uniform. We're talking, grams, milligrams would be the difference, but there's tiny differences between any 2 pennies. I'm curious how small the margin of error is. It's got to be tiny. But their coins were all weight-based. It was actually a measure of silver, of gold, of copper, whatever it was. So, says Shmuel, din number 2, V'lo al hamadbeya yoser mishasus. You're not allowed to extend the weight of a coin more than a 6. V'hamistaker, when a merchant is gaining, lo yistaker yoser mishasus. He shouldn't gain more than a 6. Good. My taima. What is the reason that this is true? Ilema mishum afku etara, which basically means inflation. If your concern is that, well, if I go up a little bit, then they'll go up and we'll have this tit for tat. Sounds kind of familiar with some things going on in our world, right? Where we're going to say that, you now have to pay this tariff, and no, I'm going to get you back with the tariff. That's what causes inflation. If that's our concern, even 1/6 can cause that. If your concern is that you're going to mess up the market, well, 1/5 is bad and 1/6 is good. Mechatesi. It's all going to cause problems. So that's for sure not it. Ella, if you want to say it's mishum the isser of ona, of what the art scroll beautifully caused, price fraud, if you want to say that's the concern, so kiheche de lo lehave bitel mekach, your concern is that we don't want to ruin everyone's purchases, and therefore we want to stay under the threshold of 1/6. If that's true, v'amarava, kol davar shebemida v'shebemishkal v'shebeminyan, anything that has to do with weights and measures effectively, and we're dealing with switching the cup, but there afilu pachos mikdeo nachozer, it wouldn't help. When we talk about setting a price, you're right, 1/6 matters. That's not our case. We're not talking about setting the price. We're talking about switching the measuring cup to a different size. In that case, there is no margin of 1/6. It's just usher. You're not allowed to change that. So I don't understand what Shmuel's talking about. Can't be Ona. Ella says the Gemara, maybe it's Mishum Tigra, maybe it's because of the merchants. Kiheche de lo lamte diyana or zaina, that we don't want them to take a loss. Says the Gemara, Daina hu de lo lamte rav chalobai. We want them to only not have a loss and stay neutral, but we don't want them to profit. Asks the Gemara rhetorically, Zavan v'zavin, Tagra ikri, a guy who buys and sells and nets zero. Is he a merchant? He's a schlepper. So you're going to tell me that we're concerned that if we change it to 1/6, this guy is going to show up not knowing, charge an extra 6 to make money and make $0.00. That's not normal. Ella, says the Gemara, you're 100% right. Shmuel's din is not because of anything Svaradic. Shmuel's din is because of a pasuk. Ella Amar of Chizda, Shmuel kra'ashkach v'darash. He had a pasuk that he was reading. Hashekel esrim geira. A shekel is a weight of 20 geira. Esrim shkalim, chamisha ve'esrim shkalim, asara ve'chamishim shekel hamoni elachem. That actually totals 60 if you count. Esrim shkalim is 20, and then chamisha ve'esrim is 45 shkalim, and asara ve'chamisha is 15, total 60. And that 60 is shkalim. When you turn it into dinarim, it turns into this next number. Mana masan ve'arbain havu. Are you telling me that it's going to be 240 because that's the transfer over to dinarim? The math doesn't even work. It's not the right amount. So it says the Gemara, Eloshma minot tlas. We learn from Shmuel 3 different dinim, and then with this we're going to stop. Shma mina number 1, that mana shel kodesh kaful haya. This pasuk has a higher number than it should be. It's more than a mana. It's 240. It's more. Why the discrepancy? Not for now. But we learn that kodesh that a mana of kodesh can be more. Ushma mina mosifin alamidos vein mosifin yoser mishasus. Yes, you're allowed to add to the size of the cup. You are, but only up to 1/6. Ushma mina shesusami levar. The concluding number is the number. So I can go from 5 to 6. 5 to 6 is a 20% jump. It's not 1/6. But the example that we have in our Mishnah is going from 5 to 6. Raya that it's mutter. Therefore, we measure milevar, the outer number, the larger number. If the final number is a 6, and the previous number was a 5, that's 1/6. I increased from 5 to 6, it's 20%. Yes, that's not how we measure. We look at the final number and we recalculate and say, was it less or more than 1/6? And Amar Ravina Masnisanami Deka, that we look at that final number because the Katani, what did our Mishnah say? Hatoda, Haisa Bachamesh, San Yerushalmios, Shein Sheish Midbarios. We know that it changed from 5 to 6, Shmamina, that we measure milibar and not miligav. We measure from the outside and not from the inside. We'll pause right here. Mirza Hashem, tomorrow night we will pick up on the top of Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.